Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Nel Bonilla. Publishing under her pen name on Substack, Nel is a young researcher working on her PhD and a prolific analyst online. She's in the process right now of publishing a 3-part series on the fundaments of the Western power projection system, arguing that the West in fact is not at all retreating but just reconstituting its fighting techniques. Part 1 of her series is called Weaponizing Time, Elite Anxiety and the Fight for a Closing Window, and the second part that is out since a couple of days is called Weaponizing Time, the Global Operating System of Western Power. This is what we want to discuss today, so Nel, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back again. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to talk to you again, because both of these articles I think are very much worth reading, because you figure you combine a couple of strains of information which I think are very important, and your main argument is very, very important to consider, because right now in our part of the blogosphere, ecosphere, the commentariat, it's commonplace to say the West is going down, the West is collapsing, but you're saying not so quick. I mean, what's actually happening is that they're reconstituting themselves. Can you maybe lay out your arguments, especially of the first article, for us?
Yes. So in Weaponizing Time Part 1, I talk about, you could say, the conceptual, the theoretical background of this concept that the West is restructuring what they are doing in terms of how they will deal with what they consider rising great powers. And it's not exactly just about the West, like a monolithic civilization, but it's about specifically Western, or let's call them transatlantic elites, power elites, ruling strata, that are really seeing, or they are perceiving, that countries like Russia, like China, Iran and so on, they are finding a way to develop themselves economically, technologically, life standards and quality, militarily, of course, and so on. And they are seeing that if this continues, then they will lose their role in the world order, so to speak, as it was in the last 30, 50 years. So they will lose this role. On the one hand, one could say a symbolical role of being at the apex, at a superior place, but also the material role, so to speak, which means the access to resources, to have control over the financial world, over technology, to have technology, an edge in technological development and so on. So they are seeing these developments, and their reaction is not to say, okay, how can we cooperate, coexist, maybe have what the Chinese government calls the win-win situations and so on. No, that's not their approach. Their idea is to say, okay, how can we keep our superior or role, our unipolarity, our primacy intact in the world, in our countries, and so on. So, and what I say in this part 1, or what I try to explain, is that this idea or this reaction doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from history or historical development, from colonial times, so to speak. This idea that there was a standard of civilization, and the West, the Europeans specifically, were on top. They had superior or hyper sovereignty, which means they can not only decide about what their own country's policies are, but they can also decide or influence, manipulate other countries, nations, how they want. And in this standard of civilization, they also had this idea of yellow peoples, black, and so on, and that there were some that could be civilized or brought into civilization and develop like the West does, but not too much. They still had to be contained. And if this process of modernization, in a way, cultural assimilation didn't work out, then they would even actively wage war against any resistance, or even, which we know happens and still happens, carry out extermination, genocides, and so on. So this is like the ideological backbone of today's reaction. So today's reaction works exactly with this kind of thinking, and one could say, well, what's the proof in it? If one reads these documents from Army War College, NATO Foresight Division, and so on, Rand Corporation, Institute for Security Studies, so on and so on. So on. The user language is, I would even say, specifically in NATO and the US Military Intelligence and Security Division documents or sections, the user language where they say, okay, even there's one specific that I highlight in the part 1 article that is called, well, it's about Russia. It's about like thinking about what will the country of Russia do in terms of the military going forward. It was written in 2020. So there is a very specific paragraph that talks about, well, we miscalculated. We through our worldview, we thought Russia was European. That's what they write. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, they didn't. Well, I don't think they said they didn't act like we wanted, but it's practically the gist.
Yeah, they did not develop the expected path, which is the European path. They developed into a highly hostile something.
And what's worse, then they say, then they don't classify Russia. They say, oh, well, they are Russia, that's that. No, they say, so they are actually a nation apart from Western Europe. They are Eurasian, which means they are something apart, something different. And then in this document, which is from a military intelligence division of the US military, they say, well, this actually means nations like Russia and China, they don't understand concept of peace, of rationality, of order, which means everything they are doing right now, they aren't doing in terms of peace. No, this is war. And we need to respond in the same manner. And almost all documents I look at also in part 2 have exactly this same lens. So
This is so important, and I think this is why your research speaks so much also to me when I read it, because you also argue that the language deployed gives us a window into the mentality of these people, and the mentality is what then shapes the way how they approach even geopolitics. And what you're outlining is that at the heart, at the core of this conceptual analysis of the people that you look at is still a racialized and spatialized discourse about who's good and who's bad. And good is basically Europe, Western Europe, and North America, because they're enlightened. They understand peace and war and what's right and what's wrong. And the others, the heathens, they don't. And the only language the heathens understand is force. Therefore, we need to gear
it is called NATO Strategic Foresight Division, which is part of the NATO Elite Command Transformation. So they have a document about analyzing what will happen in the future. I don't talk about it just a little bit, I think, in part 2. So And what they're basically saying is right now there is a pervasive competition unfolding, spreading across all domains at all times, everywhere. When they say pervasive competition, they don't mean in economic terms or just in development terms. No. What they actually mean, and this then ties back to the US military doctrines document, is in the, let's say in the doctrines that the US military has laid out in the 2020s, they state competition now means the gray zone, hybrid warfare. Which means, and when they say all domains, they mean that every domain from financial, technological, military, even cultural, social, cognitive, everything is part of this warfare, of these operations that are carried out according to the US military against the US, for example, according to the European Union against the European Union, and so on. And it's coming specifically from Russia, from China, and so on. And what I also found there, and which has very much to do with all of this, is that there's one document from the US Army War College that's called Outplayed, Regaining Strategic Initiative in the Gray Zone. It's from 2016, actually. And there they say, and I think this is quite important, they say something like the gray zone competition is all about having or threatening the American-led status quo. So it's not even about war. It's not about what they call kinetic actions. It's about the American-led status quo. So what I mean, they say it plainly. And from there, so starting in 2016, from there, all these other documents that I analyzed coming from NATO or from the US Army keep using these concepts of gray zone, hybrid warfare, and specifically competition. So when they say there will be competition everywhere at all domains, no matter what they're saying is there will be warfare-type action everywhere, coming from everywhere at all times, and we need to prepare accordingly. So, and what they also say, and this is important, I put out there a video that I found also on this NATO Elite Command Transformation website. And then this video is really strange. It's 1 minute long, and they talk about, okay, what will the war of the future look like? So the important thing here is, at the end of the video, they say, well, the time is now, time is running out. Today starts tomorrow. We have to act now. Are you willing to choose war side to war side or something? Saying that we need to choose war now, which is, and not in the sense of kinetic action again, but in the sense of seeing how in the so-called domains and all of them, the US and its allies can construct operations that will either harm or obstruct the development of Russia, China, and all countries that are threatening the American-led status quo.
And I must say, like, this video is utterly insane. I will either link it in the description so people can watch it, or maybe I even superimpose it here or so and show it to everybody. But it's insane. This is an insane video, including like some AI scenes of all of these threats, and we need to dominate, we need to impose, otherwise we will be imposed upon, and the threat is everywhere. And this is an official NATO video. It's on their YouTube channel. This is what NATO puts out, saying like, oh no, this is good for us. This is how we present ourselves. These people are insane. I mean, you watch this, you would think this was made by some gaming kid. It's not gay. This is NATO. It's hard to describe just how shocking it is to see that that this kind of stuff gets produced. But please continue.
Yeah, it's I'm laughing. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. So And what is interesting about the idea, this, as a side comment, although it's also, it still ties into this, is I think one of the editors, producers, I mean NATO's the producer, but like the director of this video is someone called Florence Gaup, who is the director of the research division of this foresight, the division of NATO. And why am I saying this? Because for example, in part one, I talk about this in a talk show on German TV. She said like that Russians, or she had the statement. She said Russians they look European, but they are not. They have a different relation to life, and that's why they can or accept more to die early. So. But what is interesting about this, the video, the statement from someone within NATO who authors these videos, but also the documents. So it's interesting because if a person like this is saying this out loud on public TV, which actually is shocking to many, it's because, and I think it's because they, within their circle of policy planners, strategizers, implementers, and so on, they have normalized this vision or this worldview. This is their worldview, and that's why they are also not ashamed to put out such a video.
They have that kind of analysis, and I think the comment that this person made on TV was in the context of the West trying to explain to itself, or like let's say the Europeans trying to explain themselves why the Russians haven't been defeated yet. Right? One of the very important explanatory mechanisms is to say like, well, they use human waves attack. Right? They throw hundreds of thousands of their own into the battlefield, and then they just overwhelm the much more sophisticated Ukrainian and NATO defenses just because they just throw so much meat in there. And in this context, because the Russians have a different relationship to life, they don't value even their own life. So they use this kind of discourse, this racist discourse, in order to explain their own inability to actually impose the outcome that they want on Russia, which and this then becomes part and parcel of the mindset of these insane people. And then that group then puts out even more propaganda like that one, not realizing actually how far out the window they already are.
Yes. I mean, and it's quite, astonishing to see what they produce, and that they see not that they seem, I think they really do believe in these narratives that they put out. Not least because if one looks at the papers, the research papers they produce for these different defense, war, and so on, colleges, they do study colonial methods. They do study what the strategies and tactics of Germany during World War II were, etc., etc. But in a way, in a very cold way. That's what I'm saying. So I do think that it's quite normalized there. But so what in the material terms, what is produced out of this? So on the one hand, what I then say in part two is there is this doctrine called multi-domain operations. So this is a doctrine, which means this is a type of strategy that now the US, but also its allies in NATO and also in the European Union will use from now on. And it's a process that has been like 10 years, 10 years in the making in the US, but in Europe maybe 5 years. And this then turns also, or let's say the strategy of using all domains, as they call it. Also, what they then need is an infrastructure, a global infrastructure tied to networks, to data storage, to software, all of this. in order, because this is their idea of when it comes, not well, also in information warfare settings, but I mean when it comes to kinetic warfare, they will need to have or want to have this ability to say, okay, we are in, I don't know, the US, and one division in the US will send data to Poland, and then from there a shooter in, I don't know, Latvia will can shoot at a target. So that is their idea, and for this they need a global network structure. And for this global network structure, what they are currently doing is, and I mean really currently in this year, for example, is they're going around the world, in Europe, in different countries, Benelux, for example, they already did this, and they are renovating the software. But also they will be, of course, renovating the infrastructure, undersea cables, satellites, and so on, that is needed to carry out these types of operations. And what does this implicate for example, countries in Europe, but also elsewhere, is that they are being entangled into a material web of infrastructure, that they can't, that first of all, the citizens of these countries didn't choose them. They didn't say, yes, we want it. Second of all, this infrastructure is in a logic of permanent warfare, which the citizens also don't know anything about mostly. And third, that it's not so easy to get out of this. Once it is built, once the military, the intelligence, security service and everything is tied into this structure, it's not so easy to get out of it. Because if you do, then you are operationally blind. I mean, then a country will be defenseless, so to speak.
Can I quote you here? Because I noted one sentence that I particularly liked, and that's what you're talking about. The plan's architecture turns the network into the empire's territory and interoperability into its law. So creating more and more dependencies through the network structure, and actually through the pressure on each member to be interoperable and integratable, then making sure that, all that's left will be integration, right? And further integration. It's a beautiful example, actually, of that is Switzerland at the moment, of all places. Our government has shelled out over the last 3 years since the Ukraine since the special military operation, last almost 4 years, 4 reports and white papers, the Ministry of Defense. And these white papers define very clearly and without misunderstanding the goal of Swiss security, the Swiss security structure, as cooperation and integration with the partners. The 2 partners being the EU and NATO, and then they go out of their way to say, like, we must not play them off against each other, we must integrate with both. But this idea of interoperability goes so far that in one of the white papers, the people there, the military planners, actually say we should aim for NATO certification, that NATO certifies that Switzerland's systems are already interoperable, so that we can share data and whatnot, which is insane for a country which still officially says it's neutral. And they don't view this as a breach of neutrality. They view it as a matter of course. That's just what we do. It's just cooperation. It's cooperative neutrality. That's kind of insanity that's now driving this realignment across the board, and actually just increases the structural power of the hegemon over how to deploy that network, which is it's very scary vision of the future.
Definitely, and I would even add that actually, I don't think neutrality, or the concept of neutrality, will be possible, or not so easily possible, in a world like this.
Yeah.
Or in a strategy like this. So the only way a country could be neutral, really neutral, maybe, is if they have their own technology and digital and network infrastructure, and refuse to become part of, for example, this one of the US and NATO.
Yeah, or you simply refuse to integrate into these networked structures in domains which have nothing to do with warfare, right? The problem is that warfare is being enlarged away from kinetic warfare into every other domain. And if everything becomes warfare, then everyday life becomes part of the fight, and you're making it impossible for people to not choose, right? But that's also part of this logic of warfare. Can you give us a few more examples of this recalibration? Because your argument boils down to the West is now giving up certain old concepts of how wars are fought, and they are not only imagining but imposing this new way of fighting, right?
Oh, definitely. So one could say a traditional way of war back in the days was to have a battle, and it had an end, a beginning. There was the aim of destroying the capacity and will to fight of the adversary, and then reconstruction and so on. So this conception of war, with this type of strategy they now put out, is gone. The new conception of war that they have is now practically that it's everywhere in every domain. And the idea they have, for example, what they describe in this concept of multi-domain operations is, okay, we compete, and then when it comes to kinetic, maybe a kinetic escalation will come out of this intense competition. We engage, we do our best to kind of win, and then we go back, and then winning in this sense is going back to this gray zone, to the civil warfare, to this competition. So it's this normal structure of war, it isn't anymore there, but it doesn't rule out at all that they are also planning for it. So that they are at the same time as they are building this infrastructure, which also has this aim of for high intensity conflict. Let's say the background is low intensity conflict everywhere at all times, but they are also planning, or trying at least, to prepare for high intensity conflict with their, what they perceive as adversaries, rivals. And the problem, so this possibility still exists, that it can come to this, to such an escalation. They plan for it. And now what I find quite a paradox is that if we go into the minds or into this worldview of, okay, we are the enlightened Western elites and those others are these barbarians, and they don't have a concept of peace, they don't have a concept of rationality, and they view everything as war, then why would I try as a country, as an empire or what have you, to keep this low state of attrition going on forever, and have this trust in the adversary that he always calculates right, or right in the sense that to not escalate? Why would I have that? It would rather be that I'm thinking, okay, they are barbarians, they will eventually go on to a high-intensity conflict, so I should preemptively strike. I think there is this danger in this logic.
Of course.
So, but so I would then summarize in effect that what I mean, some are saying we are in World War III, for example, and I would say we are. I've used this metaphor in a waiting room. And there's someone in the kitchen cooking all the recipes out of if and when we come into the living room, what there will happen. So it's not, maybe it's a type of new Cold War, and World War III, what they are planning for is this high-intensity conflict. Now, what also maybe seems so strange is, are all these planners and strategizers and those that give all the money to these endeavors, are they not thinking, okay, we actually don't have the industrial capacity to do this? Because even though they want to use networks, even though they want to use that one could have if one looks at all these documents.
Yeah, no, the amazing thing is, of course, that all of this happens out in the open, these papers, and NATO shells them out themselves, right, as you said, and even these videos. But the one part of the question is, of course, I mean, how much of what they write in there is is over and beyond anything that the West can still hope to achieve, right? I mean, what is science fiction that they are saying, like, we need to get this, but actually the whole economic industrial base is lacking to get there. One of the examples is, of course, that they are saying within those concepts that you need to not only prepare for all of these multiple theaters, you need to push, right? You need to be the first. And you need to make sure that the other one gets overextended, right? That the Russians need to invest into drone technology, need to invest into their front lines, need to invest into shells, need to invest into Georgia, into Armenia, into Central Asia, so that you can constantly push them to overstretch themselves, right? While not realizing that means that's what you have to do too. With even less of an industrial base. But okay, fine. Let's put that aside. That's the strategy, and part of it is the insanity. But the other thing is, of course, then this clear admission to the projection that this is, of course, what they're doing, right? This is their plans. They want to have multi-level war with everybody because they believe they can win it. And again, as you said, this is not what society sign up for. Officially, except for the United States, all of Europe's ministries of defense are still called ministries of defense. We never agreed that this is now that these are going to be the ministries of gray zone, multi-domain, offensive warfare against others. We never said so, but this is the implication that's what's matter of course we need to do. And that's different from arguing that the West is actually in retreat. If anything at all, then the West is in a delusion, but in a very dangerous one. You know, it's like, you know, even if you're in a delusion and if you're going crazy, but if you go crazy and you're holding a chainsaw, well, that does make you dangerous, even if you go insane, or precisely because you go insane with a chainsaw. How do you view this and the elite factor within that?
Yes, exactly. So, how do we? I mean, what I find quite frightening is, so this is really like an elite factor, because what we need to understand is all these institutions of defense, of security, all these colleges, university departments, and so on, that develop these strategies, but also on the other side, the corporations, some of them, I mean, some of those within finance, we need to understand kind of that they have institutional memory, so to speak. So if the institutional memory and mechanisms and so on come from colonial times, they will carry them on until this day. And then there's the other part, that benefits them, of course. So what's more is that this type of strategy they want to now employ, this doctrine of multi-domain operations and so on, brings them contracts, brings them status, position, but also for the defense contractors, for example, they will have steady contracts, because their idea is that there's actually no end in sight. In one of the documents, they practically say, well, we have a phase 1, a phase 2, and phase 3, there's no end in sight, because it will have to continually be renovated, modernized, and so on. So there's also this material factor. And I think what the problem is, let's say for us, as normal people, as common people, is that for the elites that we task to organize, manage complex societies, now have an anxiety that they will lose their status in all manners of levels, symbolic, cultural, and so on, because there are other models of development that are not Western, and so because these models also take away the access to resources, But what is what they are balancing or what they are saying in essence with all these preparations is that their loss of anxiety is what makes them panic, and what they will try to stabilize their position for. They will not stabilize their societies, their citizens' societies. For them, they will do exactly the opposite. They will use the citizens in every one of these countries that are within these networks and so on to wage these wars in one way or another, whatever domain they have in mind, whether or not it has success. They will attempt it anyway.
Yeah,
that's what
just as they attempted it with Ukraine anyway.
Exactly.
And for 3.5 years, we've been saying these Looney Tunes are going to fight to the last Ukrainian, and that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, Ukraine is all but lost, but you will still rather try to fire a Tomahawk missile into downtown Moscow, which will not change a damn thing about the front line. But you rather do that than actually call it quits and say, like, okay, fine, we need to actually agree with the Russians that we sit down and root causes and we find we do the political solution. You still pretend that the fight can still be continued even when it's utterly clear that for the objective purpose of what you want to achieve it can't.
And for one, there's something else came to my mind in this topic of these elites, these functional elites, is this that depending on, and I think we are right now in a quite dangerous moment in history, depending on the moments, the phases in history, they will enlist, you could say, different parts of specialists, so to speak. So if you look at all these strategy and white papers and so on, and who writes them and all of this, I think there are different categories. So, for example, there are those that develop the theory, those that develop the strategy, those that develop the implementation, the infrastructure, the tactics, etc. So, and they will have different biographies and different, we could say, conglomerations of institutions where they are socialized. But I would say right now in this dangerous moment, what I'm also seeing, and I didn't take up on it in these articles, maybe I will in the third part, is that they are also trying to see, okay, right now, if we want to really prepare for kinetic high intensity and not only low intensity warfare, we will also need specialized or specialists of violence, in the sense of people that are very radical ideologically and will carry out acts with carelessness. And on the other hand, what they also want, it's quite clear, is exploit their citizens, but not only as cannon fodder, also as simply the labor force they have. So it's and I think it's more, and the second part is more because they want to, I think, exploit the moment of where they're trying to distract the masses, so to speak, with these scenarios of radicalization in ideologies. So I think this is another danger that lies here, and that they will probably use or are already employing. So yeah, that's quite bleak.
Yeah, no, it is bleak. It is bleak. I mean, we also see how some of these military, not manuals, but the white papers. I'm thinking of one in Sweden, but I can't currently recall anymore what it is called. But how they prescribe, the militarization of civil society and the use of civil society for the means of the military, which of course then also eradicates the line between military and civilian, which then also makes the entire Geneva Conventions basically go away, right? Because if everybody becomes part of the military, then everybody is a legitimate target, and you don't only do that to the other population, you do that to your own. So you totalize. We are in a process of totalizing the concept of war, which is the opposite of what international law tries to do. Tries to compartmentalize and then protect certain groups, including those who don't don't fight anymore. One more element that we really need to talk about is the crisis actually of realism. Realism is currently going through one of its worst periods, because the whole assumption of realism is that states will do what's best in the state interest, right? And that the survival of the state is at the core of the entire theory. But what we're seeing currently is that Western elites are so far integrating and kind of transcending the nation that we see choices, policy choices, which from a national perspective are utterly self-destructive. I mean, you can look at what Mr. Zelensky does in Ukraine, but we can also look at Mr. Merz and others in Germany and in France, and how these elites, which you already worked on in one of your other articles, right? How these elite networks are transatlantic, and they don't necessarily think anymore in what's good for the nation, but what's good for the empire. And then other colleagues describe this as globalism, the people who transcend the nation, right? But maybe globalism is not that good an analytical framework, but maybe the imperial structure also of capitalism, as the Marxists have it, maybe give us better of a handle on this. Can you maybe speak just a little bit about the post-national factor within this mass formation that we are seeing?
Yes. So I would also say, I mean, not only I as an analyst, but I would say that there is indeed such a, and maybe it has really to do with this development of how the capitalist economy has developed in the last 20 years with all these transnational companies, and specifically the US and some European transnational companies. And why do I say that? Because for example, and or not for example, specifically with this strategy they right now are employing, it's not just a plan anymore. They have this concept of dual use. They also have this concept of that the corporations will carry a grand load in this development and production of all of these things that they will need for these operations. And yes, they are modern transnational, transatlantic in the sense that these are elite formations, we could say, between the US and the European Union. Well, some European countries specifically, not only, but mostly. And so rather than, as we say, that these, for example, the politicians, which I think more and more are actually only carrying out practically, not the plans or ideas, but these dynamics that come from this, how the economy has developed, and specifically in these countries, Western countries, they are carrying out these dynamics. And these dynamics are not in the interest of the citizens, the masses, not at all. And rather, in this case, for example, the politicians, I think, are then positioned for the function that at this historical moment is needed, for example, to have a lot of theater, spectacle, polarization, and so on. And that has to do with why do they do that? Also written another article previously about they don't need to the speech of the Colombian president in Spain at the UN in Ukraine. Why do I mention it? Because if it comes to mention actually the catastrophe, they can saying that there are these transatlantic transnational elites, but there are also, of course, people. And he had this idea, or this proposition, that what we need to do is unite as people, but across nations, borders, and so on and so forth. Because they do this too, so why not we? And this is also, interestingly, which a theory, I mean, if anybody's interested, that is being developed in Latin American geopolitical analysis. Mm-hmm. The theory that there is this idea of networking the empire, mm-hmm. and then that there should also be on the side of resistance in networking of the citizens, the masses, the people everywhere, in order to counter this.
I very much agree. I do think this is maybe the only antidote we actually have to trying to fight this, which is really, I can only describe it as a form of institutionalized drive toward insanity that is going on, because it also radicalizes on that side. I think we can clearly see that over the last 4 years, or even like 5-6 years, because I would say we should include the Corona time as well. It's a radicalization of the mindset of these ideologues that now try to carry war into all possible domains, right? And that which then mutually reinforce each other over time and space, together with, of course, the enemy that you conjure up and then interpret yourself. If there's a chance against this, it's through networking on the ground to say like no, guys, you're just insane. The problem is you're also at the levers of power, but
it's a problem.
Yeah, that is the problem. But where do you see? Is there something we didn't mention yet that's important to understand this systematic component of the problem that not component, but the system of insanity that's now breeding the Third World War in front of our eyes that needs to be understood?
I would say it's important to exactly understand the mechanisms, the networks. Also, who is doing this, not because of personal animosity or so, but also to understand where are they coming from. And also, for example, the mechanisms not only of how are these plans thought out, what type of worldview is behind them and so on, but also the mechanisms of how is it that we even have this type of elites, so to speak, these politicians. What can we even do to undo this? So we need to understand all of these mechanisms, because if we don't, again, it's not only that they are radicalizing. Their intent, their intent is to bring some elites that are already hyper-radicalized ideologues in order to then radicalize and manipulate the masses, the citizens, for their gains, which, of course, as we see, are terrible. Which again are against the Geneva Convention, because they say everywhere at all times there's war. The adversary is doing the same, which means also that the adversary, the whole population, is a target, and vice versa. So the only thing I would say that